truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold these truths with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
So many of you have heard in the last week that there was a Navy SEAL killed in Ukraine. And the headline often goes, Navy SEAL deserter killed in Ukraine. His name was Daniel Swift. He was on SEAL Team 1. He was on SEAL delivery vehicle teams. And over the last week, I never knew him. Over the last week, I've gotten in touch with friends of mine who did know him, at least two very close friends of mine who I trust. And I trust their word and I trust their judgment. And all I want to do right now is put out some facts about who Dan was, why he ended up in Ukraine, why he's called a deserter, and what happened. On the line right now, I've got Jason. Jason actually served with Dan in Ukraine. He was his team leader over there, so knows Dan really well, knows exactly what happened. We're going to get into a longer conversation about Ukraine and what guys are doing over there. But I want to give the team guy perspective here. I want to give the team guy perspective of how we see guys like this. And when you hear the word deserter, you think of someone who, ran away from war. You think of someone who ran away from their teammates, who ran away from service. It's worth noting that that's absolutely not the case here. He didn't do any of that. In fact, he did 2 platoons in the SEAL teams, got out of the Navy, became a cop, and then missed it so much he came back, did deployments with SEAL Team 1, deployed to Iraq, to Afghanistan. During his last deployment, his marriage fell apart. And this is probably something you've read in the news, that his marriage fell apart and there was altercations, etc. There was a warrant out for his arrest. And in his mind, he thought it was better to simply leave the situation. And you can judge whether that's right or wrong. The truth is, we don't know all the facts. I don't know all the facts. There's really no one who does. If you want to hear his side of the story, he wrote a book under a pseudonym, I think, called The Fall of a Man. I think you can buy it on Amazon, and that's his side of the story. And he left. He ended up in Thailand, where he taught children English and things like that. And then he ended up in Ukraine. And Jason, we were talking before we started recording, why does a man go to a place like Ukraine? What was Dan's reasoning?
Well, he went to Thailand and, he desperately missed his own children. So he started helping with children to help and protect them in Thailand. And he heard these rumors of, north of Kiev in Ukraine, what the Russian VDV were doing to children, tying them to tables, raping them to death in front of their parents. And that struck something with Dan. He's a man of honor, integrity, fights for freedom, and ultimately wanted to protect those children and use the skill set he had to assist a country who, was invaded and protect their sovereignty. And so he showed up in Ukraine as a lone man to do, offer his skill set, very humble, asked where he could fit in, and he became a very valuable tool for the country.
So, and it's just worth noting again, I just want to give the team guy perspective here to the public, because this is not what you've read on the headlines and in articles. I've talked to some very close friends of mine who served with him, and they have nothing but good things to say from the SEAL perspective. And, for those who know what I'm talking about, my personal opinion is he deserves his picture on the wall. And for those who don't know, it's okay. You don't need to know. But he deserves his picture on the wall. And from the team guy perspective, he went out to fight for freedom. He went out to get after it and to get after the cause of freedom and to defend it. And he felt what he was doing was right. And obviously our government's policy also feels it's right because we support that effort. And you can judge him for what happened before that and how it all went down. But people should know that it's complicated. It's a little bit more complicated than maybe some of the headlines tell you. And so that's it. I wanna move on, Jason, to just the conversation about how guys end up in Ukraine and like how what you guys do over there, how Dan ended up there. I mean, let's start from the beginning. So a guy like Dan, like how he hears about this going on. What do you do? Do you like take a plane to Poland? I mean, is there like an online like is there a website you sign up for? Like how do you even get involved in this?
So in the beginning, it was guys just showing up to the border and volunteering at the crossings to the Ukrainian government. Hey, I want to help you. And then it transformed slowly into a website where guys would put in an application. They'd be screened. People would be denied based off of their intentions of coming there or approved. Then they set up a training base for foreigners coming where they would organize guys together and make team leaders, train the guys on different tactics. And then, like sniper in one platoon, breachers, assaulters, team leader, just break it up so it was mixed. And usually what happens with guys like myself and Dan, we get there and they pull the soft guys with heavy experience out, and they try to put us in as a team leader and give us a team to take so that they have the most effect in a generally large area they can. But with us, we all seem to gravitate together. No matter what happens, we find each other, we pull together. And when I first found Dan, he had done just that. He was with a Korean SEAL. He was with some U.S. Army Rangers. There was another SEAL there from another organization. I mean, there was just a group of guys that you couldn't believe how humble and how professional they were. And under the service,
I want to clarify for the audience that none of these people are active duty. These are not like active duty folks. These are guys who were previously in the Rangers or previously in the SEALs.
These are all guys that served, finished their active obligated service, and decided to come give Zelensky the help that he asked for.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, the nastiest part of the war was up in Bucha and Irpin. And, the VDV soldiers were, and I saw this, they were chaining children to like a coffee table and raping them while they had chained the family to a wall and forced the family to watch their child be raped over and over a period of days. Like their entrails hanging out where they bleed to death. And then once the child dies, the Russian soldiers would kill the parents. This is a kind of person that we're fighting against, the kind of people, and it's not an isolated incident. That's
a pretty extraordinary war crime. It's just a crime of humanity. I mean, it's horrible. Well, we've never heard. I mean, we've heard of a lot of pretty bad things. I haven't heard of something like that. I mean, how do you when you say you saw it, like, what do you mean? Not like
I went there, I saw it, and right away, to me, it just struck something inside of me. Like during an operation, you guys would be like clearing a building and I mean, that's horrible. And we capture these soldiers.
Yeah.
And we interrogate them, and they tell us, they're proud of it. They boast about how they need to rid the world of the Ukrainian DNA, that they're subhuman, and that this is acceptable to do to them because they're Ukrainian. And it blows your mind.
The amount of propaganda that occurs in Russia towards Ukraine, towards the US for that matter, is pretty mind blowing. I mean,
absolutely, like it's insane the amount that they do. Like, I mean, the Russians even brag about blowing up Abrams tanks in Ukraine right now. And as you know, as a congressman, we don't have Abrams tanks in Ukraine, but they say they've blown up every single HIMARS unit. And, obviously they haven't. They just lie about literally everything. And you got to understand though, I try to explain this to people on an economic status. Russia has an economy 1/3 the size of Texas, but a land mass bigger than the United States. And, if you believe that, let's just pretend here, if Texas's economy was responsible for the entire DoD budget, you couldn't wage a war on Canada with that. It wouldn't be possible due to the fact of the limits of the economic strains that would place on the military.
Yeah.
So Russia was this giant paper tiger that boasted about how great they were, and they were going to run through Kiev in 72 hours. And here we are a year later, and they're hopping along trying to, call this special military operation that with propaganda, how they're doing so great. Ukraine's going to fall at any time. And, there's estimates of 188,000 casualties of Russians so far. And, I can tell you from firsthand experience, this stuff is true. I mean, the amount of, when I say casualties, I mean dead and wounded soldiers.
Mm.
But I mean, one operation, for instance, that Dan led himself. There was a operation. Dan led some Ukrainian SEALs and other Americans up a swim up a river.
Yeah.
They swam to a small town. They ambushed the town of Russians, and their objective, they drew the Russians in. So the Russians kept bringing in more tanks, more MLRS, more vehicles, and they believed they were being attacked by an equivalent force, but it was Dan and a platoon of guys.
Yeah.
And once Dan got them in, the headquarters, Dan's Ukrainian team leader, called in a HIMARS strike on the town, and they killed 1,500 Russians in one strike. Like, Dan was responsible for that. Dan set that mission up. Dan planned it. Dan swam up the river, and then they struck it. And, Dan was awarded one of Ukraine's highest honors for that. And
really,
I believe they had one American wounded on that, and they exfilled him, got him treated. But these losses the Russians are taking are so heavy, it's almost unbelievable. And then when we capture them, we'll take these guys prisoners, and we treat them fairly, respectfully. And as soon as they see we have American flags, they think we're Americans. We tell them that we're with the Ukrainians, and they try to talk to us as Americans like we're allies and that we should be helping them against Ukraine. And we ask them, why are you doing this? And they don't even really know. Yeah. They tell us that they try to explain to us how they get paid in rubles, and they haven't been paid. They haven't been fed. If they retreat, the Chechens were never brought in to help. They were brought in to be the enforcers for the Russians. So if the Russians retreated, the Chechens were supposed to kill the retreating Russians. So, and the Russians would tell us this, like, we don't have a choice. We either fight you, or if we try to leave, then we get killed by Chechens and by Russians in the rear. It's a meat grinder. And the sad thing is, you get in a firefight with these guys and capture them, and the first thing that they care about is food. They haven't eaten in days, and we give them MREs and water, and they eat, drink water. And I guess they're more shocked that we are hospitable, and the Ukrainians are a professional country that treats them properly, feeds them, gives them water. And it's almost eye-opening to them, because all the propaganda they've been given over time to believe something that's completely not true and just be pushed into this. So back to that economic standard, with Russia failing at everything, we see guys with cardboard, I'm not joking, literally like aluminum tin metal for body armor, cardboard, World War II thin metal helmets that are covered by a new Russian, like someone sewed up a helmet cover to make it look modern, but it's a tin helmet underneath it. It's the old World War II helmet.
Completely useless. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the people, the soldiers, these guys are ethnic Russians from like the Far East that, some of them don't even speak Russian, and they Asian descent, and they try to explain, talk to us the best they can. And man, it's really pathetic what Russia is doing to their people, what they're pushing them into. And, it's even worse that these people come, you heard about, I was there in the Severodonetsk area. Me and Dan were in a big firefight there. And there was a guy, you might've seen him on social media, with a big black cowboy looking hat. And they captured a Ukrainian infantry soldier and castrated him with a razor blade.
Jeez.
It's stuff like that. Like they commit these war crimes, just they're animals. And what makes Ukrainians, what makes us better than them, and I tell the Ukrainians this all the time, is our ability to be dangerous, but to control that danger, to be able to use it when it's needed and then control it when it's necessary. And we do that. And
it's like the true sign of a warrior is you can shoot a bad guy right in the face and then immediately help a small child across the street and take care of them. You can immediately transition into both states. And what you see, and this is, of course, this isn't surprising because this is how Russians have been for a very long time when it comes to warfare. And like this idea, and it's a very old idea. It's very ancient. This idea that you have to terrorize and terrify your opponent in order to beat them. And of course you're going to do that if your capabilities are mismatched. And it seems like to an extent they know that they are. And it's just unfortunately just bred into the culture that you've got to do these horrible, horrible crimes to the other side as a way of psychological warfare as well.
Well, and I think that's the difference right there of the Russians, that not only is that true, but when they do commit these crimes, it's socially acceptable in their society to do these. It's totally acceptable. Like no one bats an eye at it because it's Ukrainians. And, a fact behind that is we intercept a lot of phone calls from Russian troops that are calling back. They're obviously in Ukraine using Ukrainian cell towers. We listen to their calls, and some of these, I could provide these to you. They're open source, but these guys telling their wives that they were raping Ukrainian women, and the wives, you would think, right? The guy tells his wife he rapes someone, his wife would be fucking devastated. The wives are cheering them on, saying, after you rape them, shoot them in the head.
Jesus. What are they, Vikings? I mean, what is this? This is what I mean. It's like this ancient craziness.
It is, and it
shouldn't hear about this anymore.
They did when we were there. They did a public poll on one of the Russian news media sites that I follow, and they were asking. They used the that voice recording of the Russian soldier in Russia, and asked people to vote. Was this acceptable to Russian standards? They had like an 80% approval rating. From the vote they did, and it like stuff like that. Like, how does a society that just allow things such as that to occur to innocent women and children? Like, and there's story after story. One of the Ukrainians, we captured a Russian soldier, this group of infantry guys. They had they ran through a town. There was a pregnant woman there. They captured her, and they basically raped her until she aborted the child that she was carrying. And they had video surveillance, so they actually ended up capturing that Russian soldier, and they went on trial in Ukraine and were convicted. And it's good to see the Ukrainians, that they're handling this professionally. They're charging them with war crimes. They're convicting them. They're giving them their day in court, at least, not just executing them on a battlefield, which would be, put yourself in the shoes of that guy's wife. Imagine, they have a lot of constraint. They're protecting their homeland. And, I hate to say it, but I never would have believed in, you told me 10 years ago, hey, in 2022, you're going to be on the battlefield fighting Russians. I would have laughed at you.
Yeah.
I would have bet $1 million it would never happen. And then here I am. And, it's not like it's an equivalent army or someone that you see as a near peer that you could respect. You see this shit that they do, and you're just in disbelief that this is acceptable to them. And then when we push them out of towns, we'll roll through a town and push them out. They'll take all the Ukrainians that are sympathizers towards Ukraine, the locals, and there's videos of this from Bucha and Urban as well, but they do it everywhere. And they'll tape their hands, they put duct tape over their eyes, and then just shoot them in the head and leave them in the street on the way out. So there's like mass genocides every time they leave an area where they just want to kill as many people as they can. And if that's not an indicator of evil to you, to anyone listening, maybe you need to check your moral compass, but raping children, raping a woman until she aborts a child, executing people in mass because you're losing land area, mortaring civilian malls. This is one, like a brutal one for me. We were in Kiev and they launched a missile attack, and there's literally, I saw this on Instagram, a woman walking with their child with a stroller, and I have children, and this kid smiling, happy with their mom. And then you notice the clothing they're wearing, the missile hits, and it caught it on live video. The child's leg is blown off, the stroller's on its side, the baby's dead, the mother's killed. Why would you strike a mall in a civilian area hundreds of miles behind the line? And the simple answer to that is terror.
Yeah. It's like Hamas. There's no difference between the Russians and Hamas, just lobbing missiles just wherever, across neighborhoods, across commercial areas.
It gets back to your original question of like, how do you guys end up there? And I think the majority of us, we've retired younger ages or served, and we have the skill sets we do, and we have a president asking for help, and we see this stuff on TV, but we're the generation that we want to see it to believe it. So, we have that warrior mindset, and we rush to the sound of gunfire. We rush to the aid of others, and we get there, and not only is it true what we heard, it's worse. Mm-hmm. And then when you get there, you're drawn in because Ukrainian people are such an amazing population of people. They draw you in, and you're there to help, but you feel like at this point, if you were to leave them, it would be you abandoning them. And they need you. The children need you. And I carry in a drop pouch on my combat belt a bunch of stuffed animals. Mm-hmm. When we go into these villages, if I see a kid, I get out and hand it to them. And you see parents and a child like break into tears over a $3 plush animal and hug you. And, it's fucking heartbreaking. And I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, imagine us, like someone invaded our country and no one came to our aid. What would that look like? And, I would beg people that are critics of this war to go back to our own revolution. Had the French not came to assist us in our time of need, mm-hmm. we wouldn't be a country. So this is what freedom is about, is, free men coming to the aid of other free men in a time of need. And if we fail to act, then what we're going to have is a society of people that are enslaved because they failed to act and failed to help others. And that's what majority draws us there, is the cause, for freedom, helping the people.
I've done a bunch of these podcasts on the political issue of the detractors, people who say it's none of our business, people who say America first and all that. These are basically catchphrases that can fit on a bumper sticker. There's not a whole lot of deeper reasoning besides that, unfortunately. And but it's become a very emotional political topic, and a lot of it is based in a lot of Russian propaganda, and the Russian propaganda that says, well, Ukraine is corrupt, Zelensky's corrupt, that the NATO started this, the Russians had no choice but to defend their territory. It's all these ridiculous narratives that, I don't know, they've been debunked plenty of times, but people still believe them. Even if they don't believe them, it's the sort of parochialism that takes hold over one's mind and says, well, we can just hermit ourselves off and the world doesn't matter. But history would, of course, say otherwise. I mean, even back when the world wasn't as small as it is now, and it is a very small place now, the world is very connected. I could fly to where you are in 9 hours. Well, sorry, I guess you're stateside right now, but the point is I could fly to Ukraine in 9 hours. This war is a 10 hour flight away. That is a very small world. And even when the world was larger, even when it took longer for commerce to reach each other, for people to reach each other, that war still found you. That's what World War II is about. That's what World War I is about. The war finds you eventually. Conflict finds you. Chaos will draw you in eventually. And so therefore, the post-World War II U.S. stance has been to do its best to prevent that chaos so that we don't get drawn into what will be inevitably a much more costly war in terms of both lives and money. And I think there's this belief among many that the world is just such a different place now. There's no way the Russians are who you say they are. That's our propaganda trying to get you to support a war that we have nothing to do with. That's the kind of thing that I hear, and I'm like, that's a wonderful lie that you want to tell yourself, right? I'm glad that you want to believe that the world is a different place than it really is, but I have to live in the world that we really live in, and you're talking about the world that we really live in. People have told me like they don't even believe some of these charges about Russians, the stuff you're saying.
Wouldn't believe the shit that I hear. And I'm one of those, I want to see it for myself people. And I got there, I saw it for myself. And, I try to have an open mind about things. And, I've been at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. I've been all across every aspect of Ukraine into Crimea. I've been everywhere. And, this propaganda that we see and hear is absolutely ridiculous, just over and over again. And you're absolutely correct, and if people want to get down to it, this is the sovereignty of a free country, and they were invaded, lands were taken. I hear people say, oh, they should just, agree to neutrality and they should come to the tables and just let Russia have that. And my favorite thing to tell people is like, okay, what state are you from? They tell me, and I'm like, I need you to understand the area that they're taking is larger than the state you're from. If, let's say, China decided they wanted your state, is it cool, to avoid conflict, we just give them your state? Would you be okay with that?
Or a better analogy would be like Mexico and Texas, right? Because Texas used to be part of Mexico. So
yeah,
I try to mean? Like, what if they just invaded Texas? We were at a standstill.
That Red Dawn mentality of getting invaded and just giving up your area. And it's not about just land, it's about those people that are afflicted there. And this is a larger scale.
Can I ask you that on that? Because you're talking about civilians who are, and because there is a split, right? I mean, in eastern Ukraine, so Russian propaganda would have you believe that all these people are just desperate to be part of Russia. Same with Crimea. What's your take on that? Like, what do the people who live there really believe? Like, if you really took an honest poll.
Yeah, no. I have a great example. Me and Dan were fighting in Severodonetsk, and we were living in this town across the river there, and there were a lot of people there that had been evacuated mostly, but the ones that stayed were what you would call like pensioners or people that are on like a state welfare type system, right? Mm-hmm. They don't really have livelihood other than the check they receive from the government. So to them, they're older in age. These are all, 50, 60-year-old and older people. They don't really care who owns an area as long as they get their pension. So
they're simple people. They're just trying to live their lives. Okay.
Russia is coming in, offering them basically, we'll give you more money. We'll do better for you. We'll give this and we'll promise you that. And these people, they dislike, I think, they're used to that old Soviet way of life where they live in Soviet buildings. They get their food, they get this money. They are so ingrained with that Soviet mentality that they're not used to freedom of, they're not going to go out and start a business and, capitalism. They're like focused on that Soviet way of life and they're going to die that way. So those kind of people, yeah, I mean, we saw them. We would come up and give people MREs and food and they would like, look down on us like, we were there to liberate them. And they think that because we're fighting for the land that we're causing them more problems kind of deal. But they're not anti-Ukrainian,
right?
Or anti-Russian. They're just pro-socialism where they want to live in their bubble and everyone else leave them alone. Now, on the flip side of that, I didn't go anywhere where people weren't forced by a gun, like the Donetsk and, all these areas that we go to, they have these big referendums. Tell me when people are coming to your door in a Soviet style building with AK-47s, standing in front of you saying, "Dan, vote," holding an AK-47 at you. What? It's not a private vote with a box. Show me what you're going to vote for right here.
Just sign your name.
That's not
it's going to be fine. Pick whichever one you want.
Yeah. Isn't it odd?
Pick the right one.
99% of the people that happens to are picking a block that the guy with the gun is favorable for. This isn't rocket science. And when you look at when Kherson was liberated, when down in the Mykolaiv region, there's just tons of areas Russians leave from. This stuff happens. The Ukrainians come out with flags and it's like parading. Thank the Ukrainians for being there. And these are people that are displaced that didn't have the ability to leave. If this Russian propaganda was true, would all these people that are, all the favorable ones supposedly already left, and these are the pro-Russian ones, why are all the pro-Russian ones all coming out with Ukrainian flags they had to bury in their yards and, celebrating and thank God they're liberated again? It's there, the proof is there, and we personally see it. And I think it's only a matter of time that we'll see Ukraine on this next offensive. They'll push the Russians completely out. I mean, look, Russia has failed economically. These sanctions, everything else, they can't support. They've lost, 60-70% of their armament. They're recruiting, 188,000 people, like we said, casualties. They can't sustain this, and they know they can't. So now it's going to come down to how does Putin end this special military operation? How does he tactically withdraw and claim victory?
Right. And that's the question we have as strategists, right? Because, and I think that's why people honestly ask, okay, can you give up some land and is there something you would give up? It's an honest question that people have, I think. Yeah. It's not ideal. And I do remind them, it's kind of like asking the Israelis to give up East Jerusalem. They're just never going to do it. So stop asking. But a lot of people don't know the situation. That this history goes back 100 years at least. So it's complicated even for the people dealing with it every day.
When you say history, I'd say thousands of years.
Well, sure, but yeah.
You got to look at the idea of the USSR, and Putin's ultimate idea is this fabrication, this fallacy, and delusions of grandeur that he's going to reassemble the land masses the USSR once had. Right. But
he's both a czarist. He wants to be a czarist because he hates the Marxism aspect of the USSR. Yeah. But he really likes the territorial aspect of it and the controlling aspect of it.
Yeah. And then he talks about, this is like his diplomats, this is a crazy part. They openly say this stuff on national television and at meetings with other nations. And they say, once we finish with Ukraine, Poland's next, Lithuania's next.
That's another thing that's hard to convince, like the American right here. And I don't know how the right wing became this opinion, but they will not believe what you're saying right now. They will not believe that the Russians did have on their intent. And I try to get them to imagine, I'm like, look, imagine if it was as easy as everyone thought it was going to be. And Russia suffered no casualties and just plowed through Ukraine like everyone thought would happen.
Yep.
Do you really think that they were just like, now we can finally all be friends? Because that's all we wanted, guys. We just wanted that one thing. We tried to tell you NATO. Now we can finally all be friends. Do you really think that that's going to happen? No, they're now right on NATO territory. The threat of war is now far, far greater than it was just a minute ago.
And that's what, Ukraine's the breadbasket of Europe and feeds Africa, everything else. And, Russia was a dwindling economy. They're dying. They needed Ukraine to survive for the next 100 years. They needed to absorb their economy. They needed their grain fields. They needed their sunflower, everything, their ports. And now that they lost that, Russia's at that point, like they know they're dying and balkanization is near without Ukraine. And people don't look at this. So they want to hold on, and they're grasping for anything they can. But the more important part gets back to what we just talked about is they say Germany's next, Poland's next, Lithuania's next. And you got to know your history and see what the Russians did to the Polish in World War. You know, they don't just say this without meaning behind it.
Mm-hmm.
They truly believe that they're capable of doing so. And we all know, like, financially, militarily, they're not capable of doing it. They would need help from somewhere. And, you know, Ukrainians are fucking heroes, man. But the little they had, like, people don't understand Ukraine prior to this was not like the US, where everyone had hunting rifles and sporting rifles and this huge Second Amendment community. You couldn't possess a firearm without a license. Like, and it was difficult to do and expensive. So
they did have what I've heard about, which was pretty cool. And one of the big reasons they kept Kyiv from falling, though, was these like civilian militia groups. So they didn't like have the right. It was still organized through the government, like you're saying. It was,
but they didn't have. This is why I say they're so great. Like sheer willpower. They started making Molotov cocktails.
Yeah.
Started taking bulldozers, buses, trash trucks to block the highway, digging trenches. And now here comes the military and what they call their territorial defense force, was like a National Guard, start handing out AK-47s to these guys. And it's just civilians grouping together to fight for their area. And they're fighting. This is a standing army with tanks, and not only fighting them, but defeating them, which was the crazy part. You know, it went from, that's why the Russians, they had paid off a bunch of what they thought were friendly Ukrainian government officials, and millions of dollars. And they thought these government officials were going to help them roll through Kiev and take everything. But what happened, these were like double agents.
Nice.
They were taking all of Russia's money. And the minute this started off, they cut off all support and actually turned on Russia. So they already knew they were coming. And there was a huge plan within like the underground society where they knew where to attack. They knew how to stop them. And it was just, you know, people with the belief in freedom, liberty. And I tell people this all the time. You know, I've been to Iraq, I've been Africa, everywhere. And you can take people that were born into socialism and control them because they know nothing else. It's the way of life. It's Russians. You know, Russians live a life of misery and tragedy just by how they were born. It's their lifestyle. They're hardened people, you know, but you give people freedom. And once you give people freedom, you can never take it away. And this new breed of Ukrainians, because they're a newer country, they're that new breed.
A young country too. This is another reason why Russia wanted it. I think you kind of alluded to this earlier. It's a young, pretty well-educated country, a lot of resources. I mean, this is basic old school conquest for very obvious reasons.
Imagine being on the Russian side and being a oligarch or a government leader there, and people are looking over the fence at Ukraine and seeing it prosper. Mm-hmm. And Ukrainians are getting into that EU type environment where they can travel to other European. They have shopping malls. They have nice cars. They have beautiful homes with toilets and washers and dryers. They have paved streets. They have, you know, Christmases. It's from their side of the fence. It's like, man, why did they have it so great? Like, what's going on over there? Right. Now, the Russians have a hard time controlling their population if the neighbor next door is living this luxurious life. When I say luxurious, I'm just saying normal, free lifestyle. Right. They got to control that message. And Ukraine was a threat to their control. Ukraine was free, prosperous. The people loved it. The Russians were starting to ask questions. Why can't we have that?
Right.
Well, you can't have that in the Russian society. You know, the best analogy of Russia that I've ever seen was a painting that I saw in Ukraine. And it showed the Russian landscape, the country. And then it had a picture of St. Petersburg and Moscow. And there were people laid out in their bikinis at their house with a pool and huge, you know, feasts of food there. And then it showed the other side of the country, and it showed people in, you know, camps, hard labor camps, you know, busting rocks and, you know, starving to death with eating chicken bones. And that's how Russia works. You know, they take from the whole to give to the few. and the few prosper while the masses suffer. And Ukraine was the opposite. Ukraine was a fair, free society. Everyone was prospering. And, Russia had to stop that narrative before it got out of control. And then, it gets into now the Russians, it blows my mind, with all the sanctions on them and they can't travel, and they're making statements on social media like, they treat us like animals and because we're Russian and this and that. And it's like, well, why don't you do some reflection? Why are people calling you that if, look at what your people are doing, trying to subject others to. And it's almost like
it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand their mentality. I mean, that they're highly nationalistic. And I think that's, for whatever reason, there's certain things that like Putin has been able to pull on the heartstrings of some on the far right on this, like fighting for Christian values, fighting against wokeism, fighting for national Russia first policy. And people are like, yeah, that's what we should be doing too. Like, why aren't we friends? It's like, man, you are missing out on a lot of context here. A lot of context.
You hit the nail on the head with this whole, it's been politicized to the point where,
people are unreachable sometimes on this issue at this point.
And these are people that I personally know that, I'd consider myself a constitutionalist, more of a conservative. And some of these people, I look at them, some of these politicians, and I have to wonder, like, is this just acting? Are they putting on a show, or do they really believe this? Like,
I think it's more, I think honestly, well, you're talking about a lot of politicians and influencers. I think a bit of it's a show. They're more following the trend on Twitter than they are leading it.
Yeah.
That's often the case. I think some people are just straight up contrarians. Some people just like to be against what everyone else is for. I think the reasoning can be that shallow. And some people just have honest questions. Like I have this question, you know what I mean? For the next Ukraine package, I also want a package for our U.S. southern border.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a very reasonable concern to have. So a lot of people do have very reasonable concerns. They want to know where the money is going. And I'm going to talk to you about
just
because you've got a great answer on that.
If I can add some context just to that, like I hear people say all the time, or I read social media posts about, oh, we're just giving, plane loads of cash to Ukraine. Let me stop the buck here really quick. Like, we don't send money to Ukraine ever, and I've been there. I see how it comes in. We have a office in DC that, prioritizes requests from Ukraine on military equipment, and that military equipment is purchased or given from a friendly European country to Ukraine, and then the U.S. money is there to replace that equipment. It's not a free-for-all where money laundering is happening like people think. And I see all this stuff about Zelensky and how he's part of the New World Order and this and that. And I tell you one thing, look, I stay out of politics and during war and battle, and I was in Severodonetsk fighting, and we just been in this, me and Dan, actually, big firefight. I had been shot that day, and we're like covered in blood. We're fucking sweaty. We haven't slept.
Where'd you get shot?
My left leg with a PKM.
Damn.
And, I actually sent you that video where Alex, I could tell you, we're in this building and we got ambushed, and steel door, PKM came through, the rounds came through, and I was sitting in this chair. One of the guys that got wounded with Dan, he's across from me. This guy's a fucking warrior, French Foreign Legion guy, just a badass, and he's baiting their sniper, and the wall. I mean, the bullets are hitting right over his head. And I'm across from him behind, it's a 4-foot concrete wall. And there's another guy, I'm sitting in a chair, and we're laughing because we've been in this firefight all day. It's just dark humor. And we're laughing about it. We're, fucking these grenades are going off, hitting the wall. And one of the guys is like, hey, man, you really should get out of that chair. Like, I have this bad feeling. And I was like, there's like a 4-foot wall, and I'm waiting on my volley to get up because I'm shooting RPGs, like stepping out into the PKM fire and shooting RPGs. And right when I stood up, a burst of PKM fire went through the steel door and bounce, comes through, hits me in the leg. I jump out of the chair. Well, right when I jump out of the chair, 2 rounds hit the back of the chair from a flanked position over here. So I guess a sniper team had flanked us, flipped the chair backwards. So we jump over and we're all laughing. So our 18 Delta, he's like checking me out. The round had gone through the door, and then the casing must have opened up, and it hit my leg, and my boot actually caught the casing, peeled the casing off, and the core went through. And so nonetheless, we get back from this firefight, and we're in the headquarters building, and I'm like covered in sweat. I'm laying on the ground, and one of our colonels, he's like, hey, keep in mind, this is a beautiful, huge building, like a Capitol Rotunda kind of thing. Wooden floor, marble floors, and it's cold. So I'm laying on it, and he's like, hey, do you mind standing up? And I'm like, no, man, I'm good. And he's like, no, please stand up. And I'm laughing, and I'm like, man, why is this major is like, hey, can you please stand up for us? And I was like, okay, something serious, right? I stand up, and right when I stand up, I hear someone's voice behind me. I turn around, it's Zelensky. He had come to the battlefield in his, his t-shirt, his green t-shirt, his cargo pants, and he's standing right behind us, shakes our hands, thanks us for fighting. And he was there to give awards to guys on the battlefield. Wow. And man, that guy just surprises me every time, considering his background. He was the leader they needed, but they didn't know they needed, right? He became this great leader of the people, and they all support him, and he's just super humble, but he's not afraid either. Like, he will go into there's an active battlefield with a small contingent of guys, and he's there shaking our hands, thanking us for fighting for his country. And that to me is like, tons of respect for the guy.
Yeah, the animosity that I see on the internet from these trolls on him is just, it's very personal and stupid. Yeah. And the only reasoning I can think of is that I think he makes some so-called men, the kind of men that like to take pictures of themselves with their ARs. They probably don't know how to shoot them very well, but they love to be like that tough guy. Yeah. And they see this guy who's just a comedian, has funny videos of him in a dress, like just doing comedian shit. They see him become this war leader, and I think that makes them very insecure. I'll be honest. I think that's the reason. I've been watching this for months, and I've not been able to figure out why people hate him so much.
I think people need to come to the realization, put it into an aspect of, if our country went into a heavy fought war, if there was some adversary that existed that could put us under pressure like that, everyday people are going to become military leaders. They're going to become fighters. And I think people have a hard time grasping, because we wrap our heads around social media and, the worship of special operators type thing they think that only military guys or only people that have a lot of training can become a leader. But in hard times like this, in a country like Ukraine, people from all walks of society have become exceptional military leaders, fighters. It's amazing to see. I've met guys on the battlefield that I almost laughed. The guy told me he had a violin with him, and I was like, what? In a town called Touretsk, and we're in a trench. I was launching switchblades from his trench line, and he's like, yeah, man, I got a violin. You want me to play it? I was like, absolutely. Are you serious? This guy had a full back. He was just fighting in the trench, pulls out a violin, and he's good. You just, I wasn't expecting. I was thinking, but he's great. Not just good, he was great. And then another guy, same trench. He's like, do you recognize me? And I'm like, no. And he's like, I'm an actor. I was in Western movies. I'm Ukrainian. He's like, I'm famous here in Ukraine. And I'm laughing because I wouldn't know a US actor, but that's the, you just look at the diversity there. You got musicians, school teachers, comedians, it's a mix. And these people, without the military training that guys like us have, the veracity, just the strength of them to go and fight the enemy of a well-trained army, pick up arms and just go to the fight for the love of their people. That is amazing. that's what draws me to them. They're just warriors.
So I want to just illuminate the kind of the foreign fighter aspect of this just a little bit. You guys are technically working for the Ukrainian government. You become employees of the Ukrainian government upon after you go to the border, and like, hey, you have your own different story about how you ended up there, and feel free to tell as much about it as you want. It's super interesting. I think your story in general is super interesting, going from the Navy to the Army and into this world after that. Tell as much about it as you want, or keep it as vague as you want. But I just want what I want people to understand is that you aren't some like random militia group just kind of operating in Ukraine. You're very much part of the system.
Yeah, I was multiple deployments in the U.S. military and Naval Special Warfare, Army Special Operations. Ended up retiring from Special Operations. I was a CIA officer for quite some time, and I had finally retired, like what I believed to be retirement. I was like, okay, I'm done with fighting. I've done my fair share. I've been injured. It's time for my family, like to really focus on them. And then this war started, and I ended up in Ukraine on another aspect of assisting them with some weapons programs. And like I said before, I wanted to see it to believe it kind of thing. I saw the TV, saw rumors, and then I go and personally see these children, raped to death, people executed in the streets. And it's like a personal issue for me. And that I sit back and I feel horrible sitting here at my house with my children and having everything we need and happy, and I'm still capable to help and have all the knowledge that I do. I just feel guilty that I couldn't do more. And I conversed with my wife, explained it to her, and unfortunately, my wife as a child was molested, and so it's deeply personal to her as well. And I told her what they were doing to these kids, and I told her I wanted to stay. And I was like, imagine if this happened to our kids. If me and you were tied up and had to watch someone do this to one of our children, think about that feeling before you answer me. And then if you need to think about it, instantly she just told me, kill all of them. And I was like, Roger that, I'm staying here. So I ended up staying, and I've been here since the start of the war. And I met amazing dudes. Dan, while we're here talking now, same thing. Dan came to help the kids, and Dan was this super fucking humble, quiet guy. Just never spoke up. He's one of those guys that he only spoke when his words would mean something in a briefing or he needed to. But when it was time, teach guys CQB, Dan was the guy. I mean, he stood up right there, boom. Next thing you know, he's teaching 20 dudes CQB in a basement on nods and just hammering it out. You ask Dan to do something like this is a funny story. Keep in mind, this is a team, like a whole platoon of special operations guys. And, Dan, I had asked him, I'll do one and then move back. But I asked Dan one day, we're in this briefing, and we had some dive operations leading to over the beach and with Dragers, and
he's got some serious equipment like on hand.
Dan was sitting in the corner, not saying a thing, and I go, I would love to believe the guys on the ground that you're giving me the information that's correct, but it's just not good enough for me. And I was like, can you guys give me 1 second? I walked over to Dan. I was like, hey, Dan, if I volunteer you to go on a dive, on a Drager dive, an OTB to get like an ISR, will you do it? A special reconnaissance? And yep. He's like, I just need a couple hours to refresher. I need to do a couple dives.
I remember how to put the Drager together. Okay, so just for the audience, a Drager is what SEALs use for combat diving. It's a closed circuit system, which means there's no bubbles. You can stay under for hours as opposed to your typical 30 minutes under scuba. But because of the way it's designed, you also can't go too deep, but you don't need to go too deep. It's really more of an insert platform. Okay, there's your Draeger refresher. Like if you asked me to do Draeger right now, yeah, I would need a little bit of a refresher. But that's awesome.
So Dan goes, yeah, give me half a day and a couple dives and just to verify equipment. I'm good to go tonight. I laughed. I was like, are you sure? He's like, hey, you know me.
It's war. Like, what are you going to do?
Like, do you trust me? And I was like, I wouldn't have asked you if I didn't. I was like, Roger. So I'll walk back over. And at the time, Dan was on another team and we were working in conjunction. So his team leader is a younger guy with like a basic infantry guy. I told him like, hey, I'm going to be pushing Dan on this. Guy's like, yeah, absolutely. You know, whatever helps. So I go back to the meeting, start the meeting and tell everyone, hey, we're going to send our U.S. Navy SEAL, Dan. He's going to dive the mission with Ukrainian SEALs. Come back. We'll debrief again tomorrow after Dan gives us what we feel, you know, when we get the full package, full intel package. So Dan, boom, does it. No questions asked. Nonetheless, go back prior to, I guess, kind of a funnier story. We did a huge infiltration into the Crimean Peninsula and like 30 guys. You're talking like a 6-hour OTB on Zodiacs. Fucking brutal. Everyone that's been in naval special warfare thing, when it sounds cool, you think about the movies, it's a quick 15-second shot.
It's cool for like 10 minutes and then it's like, okay.
Yeah, in reality, 10 minutes later, you're beaten to death by your RPGs, your 240s, your saws, your sniper rifle. I mean, it's just horrible all around. Beat on the equipment, the people. We do this huge fucking transit. We insert, then we're doing rucks through, 18 kilometers and 6 inches of sand. I mean, just brutal. I mean, imagine going to the elephant cages 4 or 5 times back and forth and before you start the operation. And Dan, he's a team leader. We make him, and we got a couple other team guys with us, and ground force commander. So we do this whole operation. We exfil, and when we exfil, I was very intent with the Ukrainians. I was like, hey, listen, here's all the characteristics of the boat you give us: the time, distance, weight, how much weight it can carry, what we're carrying, our weight per man. You can only have so much, like one driver on the boat, you need 10 extra gallons of fuel. We can go this far, but giving them all they show up, they don't have the fuel I told them. They have like 3 dudes on each boat just in case they need to give us fire support. So we're completely overloaded. I mean, it's insane. And we have to make a choice. Do we leave dudes like me and Dan back and let the other guys go and then they'll come back for us, or do we all go? And a decision was made that we just risk it because it was too risky to leave guys back. So we all jump, we're going, and it's like 4 a.m. in the morning. You can't see land. We're in the middle of nowhere. Boats are out of gas. They're taking on water, and there's no flotation. We don't have water wings. We don't have inflatable vests. We don't have fucking UDT vests. There's no life jackets, and we're all wearing body armor, combat belts, pistols, rifles, nods. We all weigh 300 plus pound. We're sinking to the bottom like anchors if you get in the water. And most of these guys weren't in maritime units, so they don't even probably know how to swim further than 25 meters. So Dan's boat had a little bit of gas, and I hear him yelling my name, and the boat's coming up, and I'm just laughing. I'm not even stressed out. It's like normal. We've been in situations far worse, I'm sure. And I'm kind of laughing, and he rolls up and he's like, hey man, me, you, and he mentions another guy's name that's with us, another team guy. And he's like, we're the only ones that can swim in this water that's this cold for this distance. Let's ditch everything for this boat, take the boat as far as it'll go, then we'll swim to the shore and go get help. And, we don't have any radio comms. We got nothing. And so I'd laugh. Dan's like, all these people are going to fucking probably drown anyway, so get over here. So I'm like, hey, Dan, just throw all your gear, your saws, your 240s, everything from your boat. And I was half joking, because if he throws more weight on our boat just sinks more. And he throws his saw at me unloaded, and I catch it, and I'm laughing. And everyone's like, are you guys serious right now? Like, are we really going to drown? Dan's like, yep, let's go. And so it was like a dark humor thing. And Dan, we get over on this other boat and he's like, hey guys, ditch all your shit, start taking off your body armor and just tread water and try to survive till we get back with another boat. Dudes are literally, you can hear them praying. I mean, just like, I'll never get on the water again. We end up taking off. We made comms like it's hilarious because we see a warship in the distance, and you get that eerie feeling. You're just like, oh god, it's to be a Russian warship, and it's coming right at us, and you can see it's got cannons on it and everything, large guns, and so I start, we're just so happened to have like cell phone comms, and where we got to that point, I called and we get in touch, and that someone calls the warship. It turns out to be a Ukrainian mortar boat, and thank God, and they roll up on us and we jump up on it, and we go from, keep in mind, this is days of misery. We got sand in our boots, we're soaked, we're freezing, just dying. We get up on the boat and the guy's like, you guys want coffee and tea? Dan just looks at me and he's like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And I just laughed, and he's like, well, let's get some coffee. So we walk in and we give them coordinates to our other guys, and they literally have piping hot coffee and tea and sugar. And I got a picture I sent you, I think, of Dan sleeping.
Oh, that was after that. Okay.
He sat down and right away he's like snoring. He's out. He's sleeping on
So
our
you guys
way.
are like, were you dragging a boat with you, or were you just swimming?
Yeah. So no, we were on that boat. Like,
okay, the boat was still going. It still had some gas.
Well, it was out of gas.
Swimming yet? Okay.
Yeah, we got to the point where we're about to start our swim, and we saw that.
That's like a movie scene. It's like, God, it's like right at the end. Or it's
and we're swimming, and we're swimming into darkness, right? Like we don't even, we just swim that way. Hopefully we hit land, kind of deal. That'd be the closest point of land, and that happened. And it just like the scenario of we went back, towed the boats, and everyone got on board, and everyone went from being completely terrified, this is just a point you admit, it doesn't matter how badass you are. There's a point in life where we're in the middle of the fucking ocean, freezing, about to drown kind of deal. And we get on the boats and everything, just changes back to the livelihood of, where we got coffee, tea, and we cruise back. But it was stuff, just funny. Only team guys, I think, can appreciate the dark humor at times like those that,
it's the only thing that gets you through it.
Right. Really absolutely. And another, I don't know how much time we got here, but I could keep talking to you about guys and the amazing fighters, other volunteers, and just the awesome camaraderie we had and opportunities. But
we got time. I do want to wrap it up. I mean, we have time.
I'll tell you this last one. This last one
goes to another good story.
Yeah, this one really highlights Dan, the kind of guy Dan was. And so we had this position on Russian special operators that we were moving on, and it was the day after that firefight I told you about earlier. In that firefight, me and Dan, we needed to flank the enemies that were attacking us. So I grabbed Dan, Ranger, one of the other guys that died with Dan, Greg, the medic, a couple other dudes, and we move out to flank them. And we get up, and as soon as we get to our flanking position, there's a 2-story building, and Dan and the Ranger, like no care for themselves, just jump up in the 2-story building, taking incoming fire, and they're trying to get a bead on these guys, giving us overwatch. And Greg, the guy that died with Dan, he's like this tall, lanky medic, one of the best hearted guys in the world, man. He came to be a combat medic to save, always laughing, always cheering you up. And he rolls up on me and he's like, okay. He's like, I can hear these guys on the other side of this wall. And I was like, okay. I was like, what do you want to do? He's like, a grenade attack. And I'm laughing because the way you just have to picture Greg, who he is, bandana on, tall, skinny, lanky dude. He had no military experience, but was like a great combat medic. And I'm like, all right. He's like, can I lead the grenade attack? I'm like, absolutely, sure. And so we all grab a couple grenades. There's like 4 of us, and we're all following Greg to where he has contact with these guys. And, his eyes, he's like stoked. He's like Ukrainian born. He's like getting his fight on. And we all throw pins and we're chunking these grenades over into the other guys. And Dan and this other ranger that was there is up there providing oversight and cover support for us. And so this goes from that day. We exfil out the next day, another building that I had tracked these guys down to with a drone. And we have like 27 dudes. We do this assault on the building and get in there, and it's like a 5-story building, but the building we're assaulting is about 5 meters of separation to the next building. And we get in there, and Dan is up on the 5th floor with me. He's got a saw, and I got an RPG and an American Electronics RPG and my rifle and everything. And we got the 2 Ukrainian officers with us, and we're about to start this assault. So I'm keying off the assault with an RPG and just start hammering windows that these guys are in. And so we started up, and all of a sudden the PKMs just start raging through our building on this ladder wells. So
a PKM for everybody is like a Russian saw, right? I mean, a
Russian 240.
Yeah, Russian 240, just a bigger machine gun.
Yep.
Like an AK-47 is like our AR-15. PKM is like, that's a big machine gun. Okay.
Yep. So sorry. It's just like blasting through the ladder well windows at us while we're running through the ladder well. So every time you run through the ladder well, just machine gun bursts of PKM. It's fucking chaotic. And Dan is up beside me, and Greg drops his medical bag, and right here he's fighting. And I found this hole about 8 by 6 inches to shoot the RPG through. And keep in mind, I'm shooting an RPG out of a enclosed room.
That's not what's in the manual.
So Dan looks at me. He's like, "What?"
Yeah.
I was like, "Bro, it's what we got." I was like, "I'm gonna stay in the room. I got ops core on, I got goggles on, and everything, and I'm gonna start blasting these dudes." And when I reload, I got a French Foreign Legion guy with a saw, and I got Dan. I was like, "I need you guys to dump a mag in between. I reload, so switch out with me. As soon as I come out of the hole, you go in the hole and fill it and start smoking these dudes." And Dan looked at me. He's like, "That hole? You're going to shoot an RPG out of that hole?" And I was like, "Yeah, bro, it'll work." And he was like, "Okay." So he filters into another room. I dropped the first RPG out, and the back blast on this thing just the whole room up. And then plus, you fill all the air up, come out of your lungs, the dust, like the roof, like the room like swells and collapses, and there's like this white concrete dust in the whole room. You can only see like 2 inches. So I can hear Dan. We're doing audibles. I hear Dan. He's like, comes by. We bump. We're bumping elbows so that we know which one. He moves into the hole. He's, you see the flash from his saw and just lighting up that dust. And as it clears out, and then as soon as he gives me, "Okay, I got another RPG ready," and he backs out of the hole, I come in. I audible RPG. Everyone gets down on their knees. Covers their heads. Launch another one, and right about this time, I think I was on like the 10th RPG, this firefight, and these dudes are coming out of a basement, and every time they come out of the basement, I'm shooting an RPG down in the basement. And I look down, and as we shoot one down, there's a small D that gets shot up at us, and it comes in the room right beside of us. And that thing hit the concrete roof, like collapsed on us. So our Ukrainian commander, Dan, the Foreign Legion guy, we're all like under concrete, just it comes down on us. And keep in mind, there's all that dust, so we look like ghosts. We're like covered in white powder, face, hair, mouth. You're breathing it in, choking. And the Ukrainian commander's like, "Are we dead?" and Dan's like, "Not yet." And we're all kind of like coming out of from being unconscious, like this black. I mean, I can't explain to you. I think it's a thermobaric, the black, how bad it was. I mean, it was just, and so we get right back at it. We clean off the RPG, the saws function again. We start shooting again, going at it. Well, right about that time, the Ukrainian major that was with us, that was the fucked up part. This is like the human side of it. I was a mentor to him, and I'm wearing his KIA band right now, and he has a wife and kids. There's a guy named Alexei Chuvash, and he was a special forces major. And I told him that if he wanted to lead us, that he had to fight with us. And Ukrainians, generally, their special operations officers are administrators.
Mm-hmm.
And once they become an officer, they do the mission planning, the intel, all that, but they usually don't go out and fight. They're like backside support at the talk. But I told him he had to fight with us and lead the platoon, or guys wouldn't respect him. And, people were kind of saying shit about him because he wasn't. And I explained to him. And so he was like, his biggest concern was, he was like, you don't think the guys will be upset that I'm taking their glory by killing dudes with them? And I laugh, and I'm like, absolutely not, man. They'll look at you like a fucking leader. You step out on the battlefield with us. And he's like, if you want me, if that's what you guys want, I want that opportunity. So he comes with us, and like me and him and a couple other guys, we were all in the building sleeping in the same bed. And so when we would like FaceTime our wives, like I would talk to his wife, he would say hi to my wife, our wives would make fun of us because we're like three dudes sleeping in the same bed on the floor of a fucking blown out basement. And so I had bought him this yellow t-shirt that, from a restaurant we went to that he wanted, and he like really loved this thing. So he'd always wear it. And anyway, we're on the 5th floor. He before we went into this firefight, he tells me, he's like, hey, I just need you to promise me something. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. What's up? He's like, if I die, I need you to promise me that you'll take care of my family and you won't let them live on the streets. You won't let them become homeless. He's like, I need you to promise me that because I know you'll keep your word. And like instinctively, just automatically, I'm like, you're not going to die, but absolutely, I'll shake on that. I'll take care of your wife, your kids, whatever you need me to do. And, he was dead 5 hours later. He led the assault team into the building, and I told him to stay beside me the whole time, and he was supposed to be right there with me and Dan upstairs. And he decided to take the initiative during when we were in that whole firefight. He took off downstairs, got to the assault team. They were breaching the building. He pulled the assault team back, pulled a grenade, and went to throw it. And when he did, he took a PKM round through the throat. And I heard it on the radio that we had a man down, and I look back and he's gone. And I told Dan, to hold the 5th, and I was going to go down. I put the RPG down, and I just start sprinting through the PKM, the ladder wells. I'm getting shot at all the way down, and fucking get down there. And when I get down there, there's a Belarusian guy holding pressure on his throat. I see it's Alexei. So I kick this dude off, and I check his pulse. I start administering CPR. I flip him on his stomach. I'm like sucking the blood out of his throat because he's starting to aspirate the blood. Mm-hmm. And I'm yelling for the medic bag. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the story, the medic bag was up on the 5th floor where Greg had dropped it. And Greg was down there. I'm pissed. I'm like yelling at Greg why he didn't have the fucking medical bag. And he's like, I was told to drop it there. And Greg's a great fucking guy. Me and him had a long conversation after this about it, but nonetheless, there was another 18 Delta there with me, and he didn't have his medical bag. So I take off sprinting back up the stairs, yelling for Dan, and I'm running through the PKM fire, and Dan met me on the 3rd floor. I'm on one side of the stairs, Dan's on the other with the medical bag. He's like, don't fucking run up here. You're going to get shot. And he's like, here, I'll throw you the bag. So he throws me the medical bag. I catch it. It's getting shot at as it flies through the air to me. And Dan's like, fucking stay safe, and he's like, I got it up here. And so I sprint back through the PKM, get down there, and we do emergency tracheotomies for, he's gurgling pink foam at this time, and I'm just trying to suck as much blood. We didn't have suction or oxygen, and me and the Delta are working on him. And this went on for like an hour, man. We're calling for armored medical support to extract him. And the firefight's going the whole fucking time. Dan's covering us while we're giving medical treatment, and he's taking control, right? Like, we're all down there fighting. So Dan has become like the de facto commander at this point, really helping out. And then the Ukrainian commanders with him, they're like working. And we ended up like an hour into this, the scene, the scene, man. I can explain to you, I'm covered in fucking blood. We're doing everything we can. And, I'm throwing up from the compression, just from the pure physical exhaustion of trying to save him. And we end up losing him. And so this is like the part that really sticks in my mind is I was taking his wedding ring off, his watch, his cell phone, getting everything for his wife. And he had his phone on him and it was on, and his wife, I see text messages and Bible verses he was a big Christian. And I have a screenshot of it, but throw it in my bag, and we extract him out and his body and get him extracted. And at the end of it, we were ready to go back for a second round, and I was talking to Dan and another guy, and Dan just pulled me to the side, and a ranger, and he was like, "Hey man, these guys aren't ready. We're gonna have to get another group of guys. We can't go back with these guys right now. Just go, you need to go talk to them." So we went in and talked to some of the guys, and I ended up taking some switchblades out and shooting some dudes with switchblades. Like 10 minutes later, that were on that attack, they were trying to exfil their building, so I hit them with switchblades. And then we medevac the bodies. We ended up getting an exfil, and me, Dan, and this other guy were the last three. They toss us in the back of this armored vehicle that's meant for like ammo storage. So it's like pitch dark, no seats. We're like stacked on top of weapons. And I told Dan, I was like, "Hey man, you doing okay?" He's like, Dan was just that always ready to fight, always humble, always hardcore. Like he kind of laughed. He's like, "Yep." He's like, "We're good to go." And he asked me if I had my phone, and I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You got to take a picture of this, because this is the kind of thing that after the day we've had, no one would ever believe it."
Yeah.
And so I pull out my phone, and so we're fucking flying, bouncing all over the place, and we take a couple pictures, and Dan's got that 19, 20, 1800 picture smile, like hardened, like, and we laughed about it later. Just the I don't know, like it's the unbelievable nature of the moment. Like there's there war stories you hear about a little bit. It sounds a lot more like World War II than it does. And most of the crap I've heard in the last 20 years. And there's so much I could tell you, like heroes in that fight, the guys that did fucking heroic acts, that there's so much more. I mean, I could go on for another hour about other situations in that same firefight that were just dudes. Were the Belarusian guys. They fucking hit a tank with a Swedish rocket that was provided to us, and it just it goes over and over, like the group of guys and just all volunteers that are non-Ukrainian except the military leaders there, just risking their lives for freedom to fight this madness, this evil. And Dan was always fucking right there, man. Never said no. The hardest operations, he was there to help. You could ask him at any time, you'd be dead tired. And I did, man. I asked a lot from Dan because I knew he was capable, but I'll go ask him sometimes. And he came to Ukraine with nothing. He just came so quick. He jumped on a plane and came. And so he had no civilian clothes. I think one of the guys, when he first got there, said that he had like plates duct taped together. He made us plate carrier out of duct tape, and just to get by until he got good equipment. And but when I met him, he didn't have civilian clothes, and I gave him jeans and shoes and shirts and socks and all that stuff. And it was just like right back in the teams, right?
How does it work? Like, do you guys, and how, I'm not sure how I want to, because I've been to Kyiv. I was in Kyiv in May. So I know that it's like a home base. I mean, you can go and relax there. How often do you guys get to go back and relax in Kyiv? And
well, you gotta keep in mind, it's what people don't understand. Like, we're fighting in some of these areas. We'll be like in heavy firefights, and 45 minutes away, you could go sit down in a restaurant and eat a steak.
Yeah.
Like,
it's wild. It's kind of like Vietnam.
It is. It's just like that. Like, you could be in a fucking heavy
or Afghanistan or Iraq for that matter. I mean, there's life going on. Yeah.
Take Iraq and give it first world amenities, like nice restaurants, building, like everything. And you go from one village that's like completely broke down to bricks and rubble to going into a 5-star restaurant and ordering a glass of Uzvar, like this drink, and a non-alcoholic drink, and a steak and a dessert, and switching from your military clothes, rinsing the blood off, the dust, throwing civilian clothes on, and going. We get back from missions, and Dan and Greg used to love to go grab pizzas from this one joint. They throw civilian clothes on, jump in Greg's truck, and grab pizzas for everybody. And it was the strangest war zone I've ever been in, where we could just be fighting like fucking CQB, like right here, building to building, near peer adversaries, taking prisoners, and then less than an hour away, we could be in a civilized first world area where children are playing on playgrounds and walking down the street. It's insanity. But this is what you have to understand about the Ukrainian people. Like, they are
not going to stop living. Yeah, they're just not going to. They're not going to cower.
I've seen people judge Ukrainians because they see them dancing or eating, and they're like, oh, there's a war. This isn't Iraq. The whole world didn't end where everyone was evacuating. They're like a third world country. This is a first world country. These people still have businesses. They're still, groceries on trucks moving. There's equipment. They have production. They're selling outside the country. I mean, it's a first world country that must continue. And these people, they have restaurants. When they're not feeding people at their restaurants, they're making hundreds of meals, and then the military's coming and picking them up, taking those out to the field. And that the military is not paying for those. These are restaurant owners giving these meals to the fighting people. And like the people of Ukraine, they love their fighters. Like, I was on a train going in there. Like, I'd been there for like 4 months, and I had to leave on government business and come back just to a local area. And I was on the train, and I was in civilian clothes, but I'm like a fighting age male. Obviously tell I'm not Ukrainian. And everyone on the train just comes up to you and thanks you. And they want to hug you and shake your hand and thank you for coming to their country to help. And then when they see you in a uniform, same thing, just like overwhelming support. And just they love especially foreign volunteers that were there and willing to risk our lives for their freedom. They don't take that for granted, and they respect us. They work with us. It's really something to see, man. It's crazy to, like, Alexei, the guy, the major that died, we escorted his body back, and his wife's at the funeral, and I think I cried more than his wife. Like, every time I talk to her, I'm like breaking down, and I'm really good friends with her at this point, and his kids, but she's hardened and has resolve for the movement. And it's a great loss for her, and I know she loves her husband, and her kids love their father, but they're still fighting, and they're helping every day raise money. They're helping for the greater good to free Ukraine, and it's a sight to see, man. It's a movement. It's
the impression I got. I mean, we would ask people, what would end this war? I mean, what's your off ramp? And they're like, just winning. I mean, to a person, whether we talk to representatives in their parliament or soldiers or whatever it was, there's absolute national unity on the cause. Which gets back to the strategic conversation from an American point of view. It's easy to say, look, there's got to be some kind of peace settlement, and I get that there does have to be something eventually. Yeah, but just understand that these people are fighting for their territory. It's their.
That's a very simple solution that every Ukrainian will tell you. How do you end this war?
winning.
Russia goes home. I mean, it's not difficult.
Yeah.
Stop invading a free sovereign country. Stop throwing your people to the meat grinder. Just go home and leave Ukraine alone.
Yeah, and we're going to let you go home. It's really that simple.
Ukraine's not, attacking Moscow. They're not destroying Russia. They're simply protecting their sovereign country, which I think a lot of people fail to see. That takes some great resolve on behalf of the Ukrainians to not go after them in their own country heavily.
There's this desire by some of of our critics to be like, it's more complicated than, Ukraine, there's faults everywhere. And it's like, this is actually, a lot of war is complicated. A lot of conflict is indeed complicated. And this is complicated to an extent, but this is one of the more black and white situations that you've had in a long time when it comes to state on state violence and conquest. But before we get back into that, and I do want to ask kind of how you see the future of the war, but we haven't even talked about the circumstances under which Dan was killed.
Yeah. So Dan was like I've said from the beginning, a fucking warrior, and other people would take breaks, like rotations, and Dan didn't. As soon as one battle was over, and Dan would go to another team, and that we had like a sister platoon, and asked to jump on them like an augmentee kind of deal.
Yeah.
And Dan was Dan, man. Everybody wanted to work with Dan. So yeah, he would jump to a next one. So, the Bakhmut area was like the heaviest fight there, and he wanted to be in it. And so a team was going there. We had worked with these teams in different areas, and they were a great team, great operators on their team, and good leaders. And I know the XO of who they were working with, and they went in to support. Huge firefight happened, and Dan's team apparently was hit with a RPG-7, and Dan either took a fragment or a bullet through his helmet into the back of his brain. And Greg, the guy that I keep talking about, the medic, was with Dan, and he died. He was killed in action. And then another teammate of ours, which is also just a fucking warrior, French Foreign Legion guy, he was severely wounded, and he's going to recover. But those three were heavily injured. They got medevaced out, and Dan, right away we started busting our asses. Obviously you were part of this as well, to get support for Dan, medical support, follow on at Landstuhl and everything else. But it was I think it was tough for all of us, especially guys that know Dan, that know Greg, and this is the nature of the beasts. These aren't the first guys to be, Westerners to be injured or wounded, but man, it doesn't ever get easier, talking to the families, talking to people that are there. And, another guy that previous firefight where we lost Alexei, we lost a young 21-year-old British guy. And man, the guy was fucking awesome. He was a great kid, super motivated. And he got shot in one of those ladder wells with a PKM. And,
this is, I saw I won't say his name, but I was really pissed off when I saw this tweet by a well-known team guy. Super cynical, basically implying that, this is what happens when you have kind of untrained people going out and, something about being woke or whatever. And it's like, these guys were not untrained. And also, what are you saying? That every SEAL who's ever been killed wasn't ready for the fight? It's war, it's war. Yeah, these are really tough situations. And from everything I've understood about Dan in the last week or so, from talking to people I trust and talking to you, this was not a man who was unprepared for war, but it is war.
Yeah, and keep in mind, guys like me and Dan on the teams, there's Silver Squadron guys, there's former SAS, guys, former GROM. These aren't untrained guys. They're just as highly trained as that guy that you spoke of that made the tweet. Mm-hmm. And if not they come from the same community he did. And so these are fucking warriors there that are taking the fight to an enemy. And it disgusts me when guys make comments like that, especially, a guy like him. He wants to make a stupid comment and run at the mouth. I'd be more than happy to professionally take him to Ukraine, let him see what's happening there. I mean, fuck, if he wants to go on the front line, I'll take him out on the battlefield and let him meet these guys. This isn't some half-cocked militia. That these are, tier 1 operators that have made joint special operations teams, and these are hardened warriors, infantrymen, all kinds of stuff. And especially Ukrainians. I mean, I don't know if people don't realize, but Ukraine's a first world nation with a very competent special operations organization.
We've been training them for years.
Yeah, and they are fighters.
One thing I kind of want to wrap this up, but you indicated some optimism earlier in our conversation about just the general outlook of the war. You hear all different sort of analyses from people back here in the States trying to analyze the situation about, look, what's Russia going to do? What's Russia's off ramp? What does a win look like for Putin? Because he ain't winning now, but neither is Ukraine, right? It feels like a stalemate. Is our support endless? What happens if we stop supporting? What do you see as the future? I mean, can Ukraine really push them out of every inch of territory to include the Crimean Peninsula? I mean, is that even possible? What do you think?
I think the only reason Ukraine hasn't done it yet is because they've been asked to hold off on completely pushing them out.
Just fear of an extreme Russian retaliation.
I believe so. Well, also, that could be one thing, but also an extreme Russian loss. The amount of Russian people that are going to needlessly die when Russia or Ukraine decides to take that territory back, and they can and will do it. But people have been asking them to hold ground for now and for their next offensive. But this next big offensive, you're going to see exactly what Ukraine's capable of. And my belief is we'll push them off of all of the mainland of Ukraine into Crimea. Mm-hmm. And then I think after March and, possibly into the summer, what you're going to see is renewed attack on Crimea as Russia has really dug in there, and they're trying to hold it at all costs, but they're going to lose it. And I believe Russia will be pushed out of Crimea. And I think 2023 is the year it's all going to occur. And Russia just simply won. They don't have the troop strength and they don't have the equipment. They've lost, 60, 70%.
They're asking Iran for drones. That's not a great sign for your military.
Well, they asked China for equipment. China's self-destructing on its own right now.
Oh my God. That's a whole different conversation, but yeah.
But this is the bigger picture. Like, the investment into Ukraine is really an investment for the world, because you have two paper dragons that are falling to their knees over a small 72-hour special military operation. And I hate to glorify war or I hate saying war is an investment, but the small investment made, I say that because people lose their lives and we should never glorify the loss of lives, but the small,
but we're talking about an American. I mean, as far as an American investment, I call it an investment all the time. We're investing in Ukraine's war to defeat a strategic adversary that's been against us for, before World War II too, but obviously since World War II.
Take the cost of the Cold War, to defeat the USSR, and we're at the same thing here, except a much smaller number value. And we're watching Russia come to its knees, and what I would predict is a balkanization of Russia. I think what's occurring in Russia right now is the oligarchs are deciding who's going to take which areas and how Putin's going to be eliminated, because Russia really has two choices right now. You, as a country, if they want to survive, get rid of Putin, and then everybody points the finger at him and says they were forced to do it. And it was all Putin, and he takes the fall, and then they beg for forgiveness and hope people forgive them and will start economic trade with them, and maybe they'll survive. The second option is, obviously they let Putin control this, kamikaze into the ground, and it destroys their economy. They balkanize, the oligarchs take power, and we see it torn apart, and its economy splintered into the areas where they have natural resources. And I really see that happening, in my opinion, because once you talk to some of these Russians that we capture, you see what's going on. They're just, like I said when I began this, is the economic situation in Russia. They started off with an economy the third of the size of Texas, this economy. And what do they have now? Yeah, a little smaller. And they've expended all of their military resources. They've expended all of their military operators to the point where they're throwing guys in a couple weeks of, training. We find out that training was not even training. They sat around. They're taking people that are supposed to be part of their artillery teams and putting them on infantry because they don't have the artillery pieces to put these teams on. So it's like they're just mixing up their whole, they literally have no way forward. It's impossible. And they know that. So I think it's a stall. This is a stalemate, and Russia's asked for a small tactical timeout, if you will. Hey, can we take a pause in hostilities for the January Christmas timeframe, and let's do this so that they can rebuild? And Ukraine's not said no. We're not. You're invading our country. We don't do tactical timeouts when we're being invaded. We'll fight for every piece of ground, and we will push you out. And just the resolve. You got to know the Ukrainian people. It's the whole statement, not one more inch. Yeah. And in 2014, when they were peaceful and they let Crimea slide out, I think every one of them has a conviction of that their failure to act then turned into this. And because of that, they'll never forget, and they will never give an inch again. Never. And I like that. They're fighters.
Well, it's exactly how we would be for our own country. And I do think, like I tell people, the analogy with Mexico, imagine Mexico was a big power, and they wanted some territory back that was legitimately theirs, not that long ago. I mean, and so, or you could go California too. There's a lot of territory. And then people could argue about who has a right to it, etc. And but the truth of the matter is Texans would fight for it like crazy.
Much as we joke about giving up California because it's far left liberals, none of us would give up an inch.
No, not even California. California's very nice, just to be.
Yeah, it is. we ain't giving up San Diego or Imperial.
San Diego, Coronado, no.
Exactly.
And this has been an unbelievable podcast and unbelievably enlightening. Jason, thank you. Jason, obviously it's not your real name, but we're not going to say your real name on this podcast. And there's a reason we're not showing your face either, because you're out there fighting for freedom. And just thank you for giving our audience and the American people a much better insight into what's going on the ground. I didn't even get to some of the questions I wanted to ask you about how the money and stuff is traced. We got into it a little. I've actually done a whole other podcast on that, so my audience knows that. And just thank you for your service to the cause of freedom. It's amazing, and it's also people like you, by the way, who when people are upset about the money we're spending on this, it's people like you that are making sure that America's interests are actually being followed through with, making sure that money is being spent in a way that is in our strategic interest, and it is, and for the millionth time, this is indeed in our strategic interest to stop the chaos and not give another inch, because it will draw you in a bigger way down the road.
Yeah, and when we in the future, when in a week or so, and I'm back on the front line, if you want to do a follow-up podcast and talk about that kind of stuff, and I'm more than happy to help you out. And I think
like where you mean the money flow and all that.
Yeah, I think it's crucial.
I think it is.
I have the knowledge, and I'm one of those show me, I want to believe it when I see it kind of people. And if I can, people want an honest, open answer, and they want me, obviously you and I are friends, but I have no reason to give you anything but the truth about this stuff. And it's what I would want from people if they ask me. Like, I'm willing to I'll show you, I'll tell you, I could show you the equipment stores. The Ukrainians are responsibly using everything that we give them, and they are grateful for every piece of equipment, whether it be a 155, a boat, artillery piece, a HIMARS, a winter jacket. These people are grateful to the American people, and when they see an American flag, the only thing that they see is respect. They love Americans. They love the United States, and it's what we have here is an ally, and it's so strong. Money couldn't buy something like this, but forget about the dollar amount, but what we've given them to fight for their freedom is just like what the French gave us in the 1700s. They came and fought for us, and they will never forget what Americans did for them in their time of need. And so I just want the American people to know that every single Ukrainian I've met, the first thing they do is thank me, just on behalf of the Ukrainians, to America for what we've done for them, and secondarily being there to fight for them.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, man, this has been great. I appreciate you very much, and stay safe out there when you're back on the front lines. And we'll definitely be back in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks for having me.